Fuller Theological Seminary forms leaders who are called to serve a changing church and world. We frequently host events that offer insight and inspire conversation on topics of interest to the global church. Welcome to the conversation.
Now, as I introduce Anne-Marie Kool, like I said before, the coolest of the presenters, I asked her about her younger sibling. And she told me a wonderful story. I will share with you a few pieces of it. This sibling is 13 years younger than her. Her household is composed of 5 daughters, 5 siblings, all females. Do you say amen? Now, Wilhelmine is the name of the youngest brother, youngest sister, And I asked her what will Wilhelmine say of our own Mary. And she said her sister will say her heart and life is in mission. Now, I was not satisfied with that, so I pursued some other story. And she told me a very moving story that I won't only touch on it as an introduction to the paper and what she will present. It happens that her younger sibling, sister, was attacked by cancer, something that all of us know about in one way or another, don't we? Some relative or our own personal experiences. And this sister, about 15 years ago, when she was attacked of cancer, she went through a miraculous experience. And she was healed. Praise the Lord for that. But when she went back to her church, one of the Netherlands Reformed tradition congregations, and gave the testimony, it was rejected by the church. So she did what any good Pentecostal will do. She went and established her own church at home. So she was telling me how fitting this story will be to her own paper. So you figure out, after you hear the presentation, how it comes together. Well, when I asked Ryan Bolger the same clever question I thought I had, he looked at me and said, what kind of an odd question is that if I have a younger brother? Then he looks at me and he said, do you have an aunt? And I couldn't stop laughing. But that is the introduction he's going to get. We will now have the worship, and afterwards, the presenter and the response will follow. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dwight Radcliffe. I am a graduate in the School of Theology with my MDiv, and I am now a first-year PhD student in SIS. And for our worship time together, I just want to share with you a brief spoken word piece entitled, Missions from the Voting Ballot. I looked at the back of my voting ballot one day, and I saw all of the languages that the voting ballot was translated into. There was Spanish, Korean, and Japanese, Russian, Khmer, Vietnamese. There was Thai, Tagalog, Hindi, and Chinese. Yeah, I said Chinese and not Mandarin or Cantonese because that's how they listed it, so hold your anger, please. Whether you blame the paradigm shifts of Bosch, the migration patterns of Hansel's, Wall's incentive for constant translation, or the plurality of Newbigin, the new reality is in this new beginning that when we went from here to there, we realized that what we carried, we did not own. There was no patent filed, no copyright granted. There was no monopoly, but we kept passing go, refusing to pay attention, riding the railroads, and paying the rent to live in our tents and proclaim who the true landowner was, oblivious to the fact that God provided free parking and chance after chance, and that the Spirit was the real community chest and was already strolling on Boardwalk, and Jesus was needed just as much on Park Place as he was on Mediterranean Avenue. I looked at the back of my voting ballot one day, and I saw all of the languages that the voting ballot was translated into. Mission speaks to this. Mission turns into this, and if I must persist, mission reminds me that this list is not just provenience. It's not that the other languages are just convenience, but the Spirit pleads with me. This is a reminder of those who are my neighbor. Not a far distant geographical figment of altered pigment resisted to my own faith tenet, but the girl next door, the man upstairs, and the kids across the pavement. They don't live in Malaysia anymore. They don't dwell in Ghana. The coasts of Western Africa now coincide with the coasts of Southern California. The mainland of China now resides in the heartland of America, and the impact of Brazil is felt far longer than FIFA. So the ballot that strikes me should actually remind me, this is not the abomination of desolation, but the gathering of every people and every nation, the preparation for a multitude without calculation. The West must learn to be sender and receiver, doctor and patient, homeless pilgrim, and grounded believer. Perhaps a rewrite is in order to critique the hymnist, because the process of amazing grace was not instantaneous. It was not a completed act of the aorist tense. I'm lost daily. I'm blind daily. I need amazing grace daily to be able to see and correct my own nearsightedness, to correct my blurred vision that often results in division. So the ballot talks to me. It tells me that like a Grover lesson on Sesame Street, my neighbors are near and far. So I must be just as diligent and patient with the Indian in New Delhi as I am with the Indian in New York. Second, it tells me that I too am a broken vessel in need of redemption and grace, that I too live in a broken system in need of prophetic critique, that the Missio Day doesn't always require frequent flyer miles, and that sometimes I just fail to see what's right in front of me. Amen.
Very. That was the summary of my presentation. Thank you very much. Wow. It's a great privilege for me to be here. I feel I've come from the periphery of Europe, and I felt quite a bit hesitant to come, but here I am. I don't know, who of you have visited Europe? Well, today I invite you on a revisit, but I would like to warn you for one thing. Often you kind of, in your thinking, in your DNA, is kind of, there is a problem and there is a solution. I would like to ask you to forget about the problem-solution thinking. And I would like to encourage each one of you, after my presentation, to write down 2 questions and to start interacting with these questions with your neighbor and with your people around you. That's the purpose of my paper. Recently, a picture of, my title is, you have seen it. Recently, a picture of a 3-year-old at a Turkish beach stirred up the debate about the refugee crisis in Europe and invoked many to take action. One image can make a difference. Positioning Europe in a worldwide field of mission implies the construction and maintenance of images about Europe and European Christianity. Images then fuel specific types of missionary enterprise and play an important role in motivating for funding. One of the most remarkable sources of finding such images is the Atlas of Global Christianity, which aims at offering a comprehensive view of global Christianity. It states that it will offer an accurate and objective and incisive analysis. The maps are told to be based on authoritative statistics, and it gives a striking visual representation of the numerical strength and weakness of Christianity. And it tries to give an as nuanced a picture as possible. Well, then there is an unmistakable general image is given of severe recession on the European continent and a second pattern of an unmistakable general pattern is the unprecedented growth of expansion elsewhere. Well, we could ask some questions if we visit this general pattern. Why is only reference made to a severe recession in Europe? And why is no reference made to growth? And if we look into the severe recession, the statistics compare North America and Europe, it's striking. You see? No, this is what happens sometimes. Yes. You see, the percentage decline in Europe is 15.9%. In America, in North America, 15.1%. Not a big difference, isn't it? But still, the Atlas states severe recession in Europe, but not in America. Why? Why is no reference made to growth in Europe? And then it states that, the Atlas is full of detail beyond belief. It's impressive, but improvable. And the amount of work needed to collect and estimate these data are mind-bogglingly. But widespread caution is raised to the accuracy of the figures. And someone even said not to engage in statistical analysis with the data without robustness checking, because they contain probably random error and probably some systematic error as well. This much about the general image given in the introduction of the Atlas. I would like to frame my presentation in the theoretical framework of contemporary image formation. As far as I know, not really applied to missiology yet, but I think it is a very important theoretical framework. And I sense in Europe right now, in Hungary, every day I sense the importance of this framework, and I will explain later why. This framework deals with the emergence, the formation, and the dissemination of images. Well, in the past I did some physics, and how are images formed? Well, there is a reality, there is a lens, and you have images. And the point is, what is going on with the lenses? And in relation to our topic, what are the underlying missiological theories and perceptions, and what is the worldview behind these perceptions? So, and what is the dissemination? What strategies are invoked by these images? All kinds of strategies deliberately play with stereotyped images and use them in order to influence public opinion. In revisiting mission in Europe, one of the questions is whether the images in the Atlas are a reflection of reality that people have of Europe, or are those images orchestrated from above, that some people wanted others to share in an attempt to influence people. So it all depends on the lenses you have. And you know, we have all kinds of lenses as well. Lenses are magnifying, other lenses are demagnifying, but we also have interesting lenses, mirrors that curve or convex. I don't want to go into it, but we have to be aware of the lenses used in image formation and to go beyond. Why are the lenses used that are used, and what is the influence of those lenses? Well, the aim of this paper, and I hope I will manage within the 30 minutes, is engaging in assumptions of missiometrics. I'm not entering into a critique of the statistical representations. My aim is to identify images of Europe and European Christianity in the Atlas, and then analyze the conceptual and methodological problems. So I will focus more on the lenses. What lenses are used in the Atlas, and what is behind those lenses? And then I hope I have I will have time to offer my Missiological Manifesto with thought provokers for continuing the conversation. And what I present is only 25% of what I sent to Amos. The footnotes I will leave out now, but you will read them later in the publication. Well, some of the images, I will deal with the following images. Secularized Europe, changing landscape in European Christianity with decline and growth, institutional erosion in historic churches, migration as factor in revitalization, the growth of independent churches at the periphery, and the shift of European Christianities from center to margin. So I focus on the images as I have found them in the Atlas. First of all, the image of a secularized Europe. And I guess that is often the image which is on your lenses as well. So it is said that secularization is drastically affecting every country in Europe. In the Mediterranean Europe, it's even said it's a pervasive ways of secularization. And it's the Atlas states, well, there is a revival going on in post-communist Europe, but one of the interpretive essays used to interpret the statistical images says, well, no revival is going on in post-communist Europe. It's rather we should speak about unchurching of Europe, how others comment on Europe. And we should rather use the expression believing without belonging, and some even state it's belonging to a church without believing. And out of own experience, it's not uncommon at all. The second image in the Atlas we found focuses on the rise of the agnostics and atheists. And that is a recurring theme. But on the other hand, the Atlas focuses on the growth of independents and marginal Christians. And it states one of the recurring themes is that the migrants impact the growth in Europe. The Atlas uses very clear-cut boundaries. There are the professing Christians, and there are the atheists and the agnostics. But the question is whether that is a right analysis. The European Value Studies says, well, half of the Europeans pray or meditate. There is a kind of cafeteria religion and a church-free spirituality. There is a large gray area, so it's not a clear-cut boundary. A related image is that of institutional erosion in historic churches. But religion has not disappeared, but it has taken different forms, we read in the interpretive essays. Decline is rather in the outer expressions of church attendance and belief. And the reason stated by an inside outsider like Daniel Jiraya, he says, well, the reason why many people are disappointed in institutionalized religion are the internal conflicts and inconsistency of Christian attitudes. So it's interesting when we observe the Atlas, there are kind of two different images. One are the statistical images, and there are the images we find in the so-called interpretive essays many of you have contributed to. Then we take a look at the migration as a factor in revitalization. Yes, migrants, it's said, bring a vibrant faith to churches with low church attendance, and they hold the future of Christianity in Europe. It's told that the Muslims in Europe skyrocketed to 11 million, but the reality is most migrant churches serve only their own ethnic churches. And there are attitudes of exclusion of the mainline churches towards the migrant communities. So the factor in revitalization is really hindered. But we see a fascinating initiative from the Chinese churches, and I could talk the whole day about this. Chinese churches now being instrumental in mission with the Roma. It is fascinating what is happening. But many of the mainland churches have superior attitudes towards the indigenous churches. The fifth image is the growth of the independent churches at the periphery. They are not at the center of political power and economic wealth, but at the periphery. And all Christian traditions are affected by the growth of independent churches. They are fast growing. Interesting is in the Atlas that only once the Roma are mentioned, whereas the Roma constitute a large part of the growth of the independent churches. A massive, in general in Europe, a massive exclusion is taking place towards the Roma, and one tends to think, well, did this selective eyesight of the Atlas also affect why the Roma are included or not? There is a revival out of France since the 1950s that has impacted now 44 countries and 2 million believers, but we hardly know anything about it. The sixth image, the shift of European Christianity from center to the margins of global Christianity. Western Europe used to be the heartland of Christian mission. It's now called the Christian wasteland. Sea changes in patterns of mission activity in and from Europe are taking place as the European churches now seek out to be missional in their own context. But still, the image of Christianity as Western religion persists. And Christianity, it is said, is still dominated by Western influences. So the question is, has European Christianity really accepted the reality of this shift towards the margins of global Christianity? And you may draw the conclusion with related to your own country. Well, I would like to deal with some conceptual and methodological problems of the lenses of the Atlas. Well, just briefly, the data from the Atlas are derived from the Christian database and World Religion database. In the end, there are some methodological notes. An excerpt from the World Christian Encyclopedia is said to give some ideas on how data were compiled and analyzed. It is said in the book reviews that, well, there is a lack of transparency of the methodology, and hardly any interaction has taken place on the underlying methodology, which I'm very surprised about when I did this research. I wonder whether the critical voices are silenced by the great quantity of details we find in the Atlas. Some key features of the statistical presentation, they say to give only a general order of magnitude. Another principle is like must be compared with like, and like can only be compared with like. And the statistics are, with exceptions, only general order estimates. We find 4 different categories of Christians in the methodological notes of the Atlas. The category of professing Christians, they are said to be those who profess publicly to be Christians in censuses or polls. I am a Christian, or we are Christians, when asked to what religion do I belong. The second category, the Atlas states in the methodological notes, are the affiliated Christians, those enrolled in churches' books or records. They are the church members. Then we have the practicing Christians, those that attend a church service or public worship at least once a year. They are considered to be attending or committed Christians. And then you start to get it. Then we have the category of Great Commission Christians, the believers in Jesus Christ, aware of the implications of his Great Commission. And then we have the definition more in detail about the professing Christians. It's stated, in fact, that it is the professing Christian definition is derived from the legal concept of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is justified by a biblical perspective, the biblical from Romans 10, So a person is a saved Christian if you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord. And the definition of professing Christian is then linked to the definition of religious self-identification as a sociology of religion concept. So we have as synonyms, professing Christians are declared Christians, so you have the legal. They are confessing Christians, you have the biblical perspective, and synonymous with the self-identifying Christians. Interesting what is happening here. And in an evangelical atlas, also the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Christian Science are included in the definition of being Christians as they following the self-identifying principle. Well, applying this definition to a European context, and that we are interested in today, where belonging to a Christian tradition is often more closely linked to cultural and national identity than with membership of a denomination and with confessing Christ, is curious to say at least. Self-identification as a Christian in a European context differs greatly from a North American context. This sociology of religion definition takes precedence over a theological definition. The polls, the statistics from the polls are considered more important than the statistics offered by the churches. A concept of voluntary adherence to a denomination rooted in your North American worldview seems to be applied to the European context with a completely different understanding of religious allegiance, mixing up voluntary membership of a religious society, as church membership is understood in North America, with belonging to a mainline church in Europe that is rather conceived as an expression of cultural and national identity. What is interesting now is that only the largest category, the category of professing Christians, is presented in the Atlas. So we do not find the other categories in the Atlas. But no justification is given for the choice of the categories. No insight is given in the internal diversification and erosion of the churches, which could come up out of the second and the third category we just have seen. And in a sense, this reinforces the image of Europe as a Christian continent with 80% Christian. So I would say no nuanced picture is given of global Christianity, at least with regard to Europe. Well, I will skip the definition of evangelization. Understandable that in an atlas you try to make everything measurable, but I think we are rather interested in a theological definition than in a measurable definition of evangelization. Well, in the next step, I would like to deal with some of the underlying missiological theory and perception. So we now start to look more in depth to the lenses that are used. And what kind of strategy is is used in the Atlas? Well, it seems that the whole focus of the Atlas works from the perspective of the Great Commission Christians. And the Atlas is written to identify resources needed to accomplish the mission enterprise, the human resources, and the Christian finances, an annual budget for a foreign mission up to $32 billion. And then the next step is to make the mission task manageable by dividing the world in World A, B, and C related to the measure of evangelization I just mentioned. So the idea is to identify the unfinished task and the greatest needs, and then to address the unbalance in missionary deployment. As it is said, it's 83% of missionaries are right now working in the Christian world. But how does this all apply then to the European context? Europe is in the Atlas, according to the Atlas, for 94% belongs to World C. And the idea of the World ABC is that people from World C should go to World A and B, to the unreached people in World A. What to do then with mission in Europe? It's left in a vacuum. Well, I think I have to go very quick over the characteristics of missiometrics, which is the mission theory behind the Atlas. It focuses on counting for mission strategy that was introduced first by Donald McGavran. Missiometrics, the purpose is to offer powerful tools to calculate the complexity of today's world and to concentrate on initiatives with the greatest promise for numerical success. And the ultimate focus is to make the mission task more manageable by making it into small portions. The emphasis is on finishing the task to trigger the second coming of Christ, and there is a strong sense of urgency. Well, there have been some critical voices against this missiometrics, and you are probably well aware of the critical voice from Latin America by Samuel Escobar, who speaks about the managerial missiology. What is important in what he states is that, yes, this missiometrics use a very narrowly defined concept of mission only as numerical church growth, only focusing on evangelism. And in parallel, there is a de-emphasizing of theological problems with tough questions not asked. Some say probably the evolution and self-correction of McGavran's theology have not been noticed. But when we focus on this reductionist theological foundation of this missiology, anything that hinders numerical growth, suffering and persecution, holistic mission and participation in social transformation, and the costly and slow process of developing a contextual theology, as it is easier to substitute them by prepackaged theological extension programs translated from English, they are eliminated. There are also critical voices from Europe, from Eastern Europe, and I have been really part of that. After the Berlin Wall falling down, 1989, many missionaries from this part of the world and other parts of the world came to Eastern Europe. The first period was a period of euphoria. The West is the best. Then a period came of disillusion, because those methods of success did not work in a situation where suffering has been so important. So the disillusion came up in the points of that it was felt that people are building their own missionary empires and consider that more important than cooperation with local churches. Also, a discontent was felt with mission agencies handling relationships with nationals. And the negative continuation of the connotation of the Western face of Christianity was reinforced. And it was felt that this ineffective mission approach did not really work out well and relate to the huge social problems, often in countries, very poor countries like Moldavia, where trafficking is one of the great challenges the churches face. Also, some critical voices from Western Europe. I will skip that now. What are the roots of the underlying missiological theories and perceptions? Well, I have been very inspired by Clippy Skritzinger, who emphasizes that nurturing missional integrity in our methodology of missiology is very important. So not only integrity at grassroots level in how we do mission, but also integrity in the methodology of our theories and integrity in the worldview that lies behind it. Well, as the missiometrics and the definitions used in the Atlas are taken from sociology of religion, and sociology has been very much dominated by secularization theory, stating that modernization and secularization and de-Christianization very much go together. Sociology has been very much impacted by it. But what is happening recently? The secularization theory is being questioned by key scholars, and they are asking for a new attention for religion in sociology. The issue at stake is Casanova, a famous sociologist, he says, the interpretation of religious decline in Europe through the lenses of the secularization paradigm. That's the problem. So the sociologists have a lens that do not count with religion. And it's they interpret what they see as decline in the numbers of Christians. But their lenses are not fit to sense the increasing spirituality and new religious movements. Their lenses, there is a problem with their lenses, he says. So one would ask, are the concepts and methodology of the Atlas maybe rooted in secularization theory? And maybe then there is an innovation of methodology needed which better captures what is really going on in Europe. You probably are aware of the excellent book of Berger and Davies, Religious Europe, Religious America, Secular Europe. Is Europe so secular? Is America so religious? I leave you with the thoughts. Well, I have, I think, 1 minute to go for my Missiological Manifesto, and I ask your help. Well, I could stop here, or I may go on for another 7 minutes. Go on, okay. I'm sorry that... Well, I have a number of key themes, and so as we move forward towards formulating a missiological manifesto for the decade as a statement of vision and values seeking to contribute to the ongoing conversation on the future of the church in Europe, we should think about this in the framework, in the context of the situation that in Europe, the academic discipline of missiology is in a fragile and a precarious state. So I hope to contribute to further this discussion. There are certain key themes I have chosen related to the images in the Atlas, and they you should understand them in the context of an increasingly religious landscape in Europe, with the challenges of interreligious dialogue and witness to play a key role. And when I present these key themes, I stand on the shoulders of well-known giants, and I would like to mention two of them. One of them is Wilbert Schenck, and I owe a lot to him, and another is Leslie Newbigin. But it also contains a lot of autobiographical material, as I am born in the Netherlands and have lived in the eastern part of Europe for half of my life. So now quickly over the key themes, and I have some sub-themes related to it. I am very, very concerned about the first image, the impact of secular values on church and mission. And that's what I see happening in European churches as they are declining. They try to embrace secular models, secular business models, to find a way out of the crisis. But when we speak about the businessization of mission organization and churches, as they operate increasingly on the basis of secular business principles instead of theological principles, focusing more on output and results instead of fruits growing in a hidden way, more on value for money instead of free grace, more on success stories instead of sacrifice and commitment, more on quantity instead of quality, more on superficial quick results instead of long-term transformation and incarnation. characterized by hanging on to power instead of commitment to offering humble service. And in 1980, the Pattaya Conference spoke about the fact that values, secular values, have impacted the churches and created an internal erosion of the churches. And that statement of Pattaya is still very up to date. So, businessization of mission organizations, there is the challenge of new religiosity and paganism. I'm impressed by the prophetic voice still of Leslie Newbigin, who spoke in 1993 that in the 1960s, he said to speak of England as a secular, he spoke of England as a secular society. But he says England is not a secular society, it is a pagan society, and the development of a truly missionary encounter with this very tough form of paganism is the greatest intellectual and practical task facing the church. And I hear it from my students. They tell stories of occult practices taking place among their peers. And I see and hear about developments that people are returning to the Hungarian god and to their own. So folk religion is on the resurgence. We are then challenged by Leslie Newbigin again, his prophetic voice 1962, to look afresh at our chart and compass and to re-engage on the biblical principles of mission, as our missionary methods have been too much conformed to the world in which he lives. The second image is the one of the issue of otherness and the reconciling role of the churches. There are very strong excluding tendencies taking place in Europe, not only with regard to the Roma, the 10 to 12 million Roma, but if you would listen now to the whole discourse on migrants and how the media demonize migrants, it's frightening. And when I was writing this paper on image formation, I was just impressed how important it is that we start thinking along this image formation theory in our missiological thinking. And what I'm doing is just scratching the surface. The importance is also, and maybe that's the Pentecostal within me, how can we bring about changes? Well, changes in how to come from exclusion to embrace. It's only when we understand the reconciliation in Christ to have implications for the social reconciliation. And only the Holy Spirit can work that out in everyday practice. But so often we live on Sunday and we live on Monday, Tuesday. So this dichotomy we need to overcome in Europe, and that's very important. So the future of the world depends on how we deal with otherness, by Miroslav Volf. And out of that is important to come to the emergence of reconciling communities. In our training, in our theological education, to train the pastors, to empower their local congregations, to grow into open, welcoming and reconciling missional communities. And there is a call for a spirituality of reconciliation. The third, ecclesiology and mission, the whole issue of preoccupation with power and control, and to move into an attitude of humility. I see too much in Europe going on among the churches, in the churches, with this preoccupation with power. So there is a call to let go of power and control and to recover the redemptive power of the gospel message of the cross. We are challenged to accept that we are a minority and not to artificially try to keep up the high statistics. Let's face reality. But simultaneously, we are called to be open, to speak with a prophetic voice in the public arena. And I sense right now in Europe, my presentation. I sense right now in Europe there is such a fear to speak in the public arena out of I don't know what. The spirit of fear is very, very strong. Linked to this issue of power and control, to accept the shift that we are not anymore the center of Western Christianity, but that we in Europe are now part of the periphery of global Christianity. And this calls us to strengthen our attitude on waiting on God in deep humility. Fresh Expressions, I believe it's a very interesting new movement in Europe. The myth and reality of migrants as outsiders. I mean, I could rewrite this part every day, but I think the challenge is to promote mutual learning and to create informal safe spaces to drink 3 cups of coffee or tea with people who belong to other ethnic groups, to get to know them. So to move beyond the stereotypes and to move towards the telling stories. And in that way, inclusive communities can be created with creative local partnerships. And I think the indigenous churches right now in Europe should encourage the migrant churches to serve in a bridging role to the massive influx of the new migrants and help them to integrate in Europe. The Roma, I can tell a whole day. I think I leave it right now. But more research is needed on what's going on. That's for sure, and we are trying to take steps here. Missiological education in this whole process is key. It requires a curriculum to face the European realities. But the problem is, hardly any missiology is taught anymore. So the structures of missiology right now in Europe are very, very fragile. And we are working on trying to set up innovative network structures, so not to be kicked out by the power structures too easily. So challenges also in developing new teaching methodologies and learning community, and we would need your prayers in this. I end with my presentation, and I apologize for my being so long, but I ask you for your prayers for the situation in Europe, not to come with a quick solution and to the problem you see, but to start among yourselves, asking questions and start up the discussion, because there might be a relationship between what is going on in Europe and what is going on in your situation. May God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Kool, for your provocative, stimulating discussion. So I'll just jump right in, and I'll try to keep it brief because I know we're hungry. So Dr. Kool's thesis is far-reaching and compelling. It's not so much about the statistical maps of Europe or the atlas. Her case study makes larger claims. What she says is that the American evangelical forms of mission strategy, with the reliance on Missio metrics and secularization theory, reduce the Great Commission to quantifiable goals in order to facilitate continued resource procurement from the West, both human and financial, thereby perpetuating the hegemony of the West and world Christianity. Her desire in this presentation is to make explicit the implicit assumptions of the Atlas and thereby create an opportunity, a space, for a new, more contextually appropriate mission strategy in Europe. So with that, and I'll repeat the core part, American evangelical forms of mission strategy with a reliance on Missio metrics and secularization theory reduce the Great Commission to quantifiable goals in order to facilitate continued resource procurement from the West, both human and financial, getting folks on the mission field and supporting it. It thereby perpetuating the hegemony of the West as Christian and supporting that. Her desire is to create a new space to make these explicit, make the implicit explicit. That is in the Atlas, but I think is in more in general American evangelical mission strategy. So I'll just break that up a little bit. So she talks about a managerial missiology coming out of Pasadena. She's quoting Samuel Escobar, who was here 15 years ago, and I was here when he said that. The source of that is the source of American evangelical mission strategy. She calls it a McDonaldized mission strategy, which is predictable, efficient. McDonaldization is predictable, efficient, calculated, and controlled. Missio metrics, combined with the use of secularization theory in the Atlas, which comes from American sociologists of religion, not so much Pasadena, seeks to keep focus on the non-West as the mission field and perpetuate Western hegemony. So how she talks about missiometrics is that you have, in the Atlas, you have World C, World B, World A. World C is 60% Christian. World B is 50% evangelized, but less than 60% Christian. And World A is 50% unevangelized. So World C typically is the one that's called out to go serve World A and B. 60% Christian is, as she talked about, is Europe, where someone may mark that they have the cultural identity of Christian, but may not even be on anyone's church rolls, may have only attended baptisms and funerals and and for that to be classified as Christian and reached so that Europe is not considered a mission field is problematic, and that's one of the points she's making. So she's saying that they use, instead of using affiliation for Christians, that they're on somebody's books, church books, which is what we do in the United States. In Europe, it's answering that question of what do you identify with as your religion? Well, that's an identity marker that has no bearing on day-to-day life for many people. And so to use that number as to then say that that is a reached, evangelized country is quite a leap. And so she makes those claims and that implicit assumption explicit. In terms of secularization, she rightly argues that the secularization thesis is implicit throughout the Atlas, and so that actually what we should be talking about is the dechurching and individualization, the possibly neo-pagan or new spiritualities that are going on, as opposed to treating Europe and America as special cases, especially Europe, as a special case where you're measuring what they used to be. And this is a problem. It reveals that there's a Christendom, implicit understanding of Christendom within the Atlas that basically isn't looking at what these people do, but what they used to be. And with that, then it makes it so that this whole area is Christian. We've never believed that here in School of Intercultural Studies. We don't study Islam itself as much as we study folk Islam. We get underneath it. We look at the cultural practices, and we're not so interested in large religious, sociological categories. We get into the anthropology of what is going on. But in the Atlas, and they do that in very many places outside the West, there's quite a thick description of going on in all sorts of different groups. But in the West, if you're an English speaker, you obviously can reach all other English speakers. It's as if culture doesn't matter at all. And so she questions some of these dualistic sorts of images that are going on between someone who marked that they are Christian in nationality or in just in adherence to atheists and agnostics. That atheists and agnostics is way overstated. That actually, if you looked at the practices of these people, they are doing all sorts of spiritual practices. There's all sorts of spiritualities of life that are going on people that we would, in the United States, we would call spiritual but not religious, or the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, as people who have actually a whole set of robust spiritual practices. And to say that they're agnostic or atheist is to misstate their situation. She is saying that actually there's a hidden agenda in the Atlas that basically needs the West to see themselves as Christian so that mission resources go to the non-West. That actually we need to get the resources here and send, as opposed to a much more complex picture that would allow for unreached, different sorts of mapping of all sorts of people at every level in the globe. And so she says basically that these assumptions allow us to just continue the West seeing itself as the source of of mission in terms of sending and in terms of resourcing. She wonders why do we have to have Europe still as a Christian continent? Why do we need that whole map to say, just be blue and just say reached? Why do we have to quantify and say these are the unreached people when all over Europe there is unreached people, and to see those countries as completely reached is just an overstatement, a radical overstatement. So she wonders, would our mission to Europe change if we didn't think in terms of secularization anymore and we let go of that and looked at what people actually do? Let anthropology drive these sorts of, and look at the lived lives of how people practice spirituality, not how they mark something on a yearly poll. And so she's asking whether we would be able to, what would be revealed by actually a more positive measure of what is going on there. So she points out the problems of missiometrics. She points out the problems of secularization theory. I know we need to go, so I'll just cut to sort of where she comes to. She actually says that the aim of the Atlas is to actually stimulate mission, but actually it's a disincentive to do mission in the West, and because it directs you to go outside the West. So there's a potential distortion here that actually hurts Western mission to the West in this Atlas. And so she talks about the positives where it does get into ethnographies and looks at the Roma people. And so she's where the Atlas goes in those directions, she celebrates that. But I'll just finish with some of the things, the implications I think that come from her fascinating study. That missiometrics needs to be reconceived. There's nothing wrong with numbers, but what we are tracking is not serving Western mission strategy. In fact, it's hurting it because it steers people away from Europe and the West. Missiometrics is captive to a Christendom mentality, and we need to move to post-Christendom categories which look at practice and not heritage. Missiometrics ignores the global realities of hybrid cultures and wants to put people in single categories when our lives are very complex and we have hybrid identities, many of us doing many, many different things. Missiometrics needs to focus on networks, complexity, rather than large sociological categories. Sociological numbers can help us with large worldview, philosophical understandings, but we need anthropology in here. We need contextualization in here. We need to focus on what people actually do, not what they state they believe, but how do they live their lives? How do they practice their faith? How do they practice their spirituality? Without this, we can't do mission strategy very well. The Atlas says the West is reached because more than 60% will mark Christian as their identity, even if they never walk into a church or maybe occasionally every few years. We in SIS have always been suspicious of large religious categories, and so to come to a conclusion, for an Atlas to serve Christian leaders, we need a global catalog of lives lived, marking people's allegiances, their convictions, and their commitments, how they actually live on the ground. How do they live? How do they live out their beliefs? Donald McGavran talked about how mission practice can fall prey to a fog. The fog from a misuse of numbers distorts the facts on the ground and keeps our leaders in the dark. Our task as missionaries is to clear away the fog, be honest about the numbers, and serving mission strategy. The Atlas, although breathtaking in scope, and it really is, it creates a fog in making informed decisions regarding the global task. It greatly distorts what is the mission situation on the ground in the West. For those seeking mission engagement in the West, Anne-Marie Kool provides a light through the fog, providing a better lens, as she says, so that an informed Western mission can be performed. Thank you.
Fuller Theological Seminary offers a variety of graduate degree programs in theology, psychology, and intercultural studies at 9 locations and online. Subscribe to us on iTunes.